Imagine a structure so tall it threatened to touch the sky, a project so audacious that it worried God, and a punishment so severe that it forever changed the course of humanity. This is the story of the Tower of Babel, an ancient tale that hides surprising secrets about power, language, and human nature. What really happened on that plain of Shinar? And why does this story still resonate so strongly today? Get ready for a journey that will challenge everything you thought you knew about one of the most intriguing events in biblical history. The waters of the Great Flood had finally receded, leaving behind a transformed world. Noah and his family emerged from the ark, stepping onto dry land for the first time in months. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and decaying vegetation. Looking around, Noah saw a bleak panorama: uprooted trees, exposed rocks, and a layer of silt covering everything in sight. But amid the destruction, there was hope. Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives had the monumental task of repopulating the earth. As the years passed, their families grew, and with them, the complexities of post-flood life. They hunted, cultivated the land, and built shelters, always attentive to the lessons of the past. Stories of the flood were passed down from generation to generation, a constant reminder of divine power and human frailty. As decades turned into centuries, the population grew exponentially. Noah's descendants spread out, forming communities and exploring new territories. Some settled on the banks of newly formed rivers, others on the slopes of mountains or in fertile valleys. The diversity of landscapes offered unique challenges and opportunities for each group. Skills and knowledge were shared and improved. Agricultural techniques developed, allowing for more abundant harvests. The domestication of animals provided stable sources of food and help with work. Little by little, the first villages emerged, and with them, the seeds of civilization began to sprout. However, as the population grew, so did tensions. Disputes over resources, territory, and power began to emerge. Some groups sought to dominate others, while others preferred to isolate themselves. The memory of the flood, once so vivid, began to fade for many, giving way to new ambitions and desires. It was in this scenario of growth, discovery, and latent conflict that a significant group of people decided to undertake an epic journey. They had heard of a vast plain to the east, a land of limitless possibilities. With the promise of a new beginning, and driven by a collective desire for greatness, they set out, leaving behind the familiar in search of the unknown. Little did they know that their journey would lead them to one of the most controversial episodes in human history. The caravan wound through rough terrain, a long line of men, women, and children carrying their belongings and driving herds. The scorching sun beat down on their backs, but the promise of what was to come kept them moving. At the front, leading the group, was Nimrod, a man of imposing stature and undeniable charisma. His eyes shone with the vision of the future he had painted for his followers. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The journey was arduous, marked by constant challenges. Swollen rivers had to be crossed, steep mountains climbed, and unforgiving deserts crossed. Many questioned the decision to leave their homelands, but Nimrod always found the right words to renew his determination. Finally, after months of travel, the terrain began to shift. The hills gave way to a vast plain that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was Shinar, the promised land of their hopes and dreams. The group stopped, marveling at the sight before them. The plain was crossed by two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, their waters shining in the evening sun. As they established their first camp, the excitement was palpable. Families gathered around campfires, sharing stories of the journey and dreams for the future. Nimrod walked among them, his presence inspiring confidence and unity. Here, he proclaimed, we will build not just a city, but an empire that will rival the gods themselves. In the days that followed, the temporary camp began to take the form of a permanent settlement. Tents gave way to more solid structures, made of sun-dried mud bricks. Fields were demarcated, and the first seeds were planted in the fertile land on the banks of the rivers. The abundance of water and cultivable land promised prosperity for all. As more and more people arrived on the plain, drawn by stories of a new, nascent civilization, the diversity of the group grew. However, contrary to what one might expect, this diversity did not lead to division. On the contrary, a remarkable phenomenon began to manifest itself. Despite their different origins, they all shared a common language. This linguistic unity would be the catalyst for what was to come, a project so audacious that it would echo through the millennia. The rising sun cast a golden glow over the plain of Shinar, illuminating a scene of frenetic activity. Everywhere, people from different backgrounds worked side by side, their voices blending into a harmonious symphony. The most remarkable thing was that, despite the diversity visible in their features and clothing, their words were perfectly understood by everyone. It was as if the very air vibrated with the energy of this perfect communication. Nimrod watched the scene from the top of a small hill, a satisfied smile on his face. He knew that this linguistic unity was the key to his ambitious plans. With a single language, there were no misunderstandings, there were no secrets, and most importantly, there were no limits to what they could achieve together. It was as if the universe itself was conspiring in their favor, providing them with the perfect tool for greatness. In the squares and improvised markets, ideas were freely exchanged. A carpenter from the north shared construction techniques with a potter from the south. A weaver taught her intricate patterns to a group of young apprentices from different clans. Knowledge flowed like water, without barriers or obstacles. This free exchange of information has accelerated the community's progress in unprecedented ways. Children grew up in an environment where mutual understanding was the norm. They played together, inventing complex games that required cooperation and clear communication. Elders, sitting in the shade of newly planted trees, told stories of their homelands, preserving the rich tapestry of their cultural heritages, all through a language shared by all. However, as time passed, some began to question the origin of this linguistic unit. Some saw it as a divine blessing, a sign that they were destined for greatness. Others, more skeptical, wondered if it was simply the natural result of their closeness and mutual need. Regardless of the origin, everyone agreed that it was a powerful advantage. It was in this context of perfect understanding and unprecedented collaboration that the most audacious idea of all began to take shape. During a night of celebration, with the full moon illuminating the plain, Nimrod climbed onto an improvised platform. His voice, clear and powerful, silenced the crowd. "My brothers and sisters," he began, "we have been blessed with a unique gift, a common language. But what if we used that gift to accomplish something truly extraordinary?" The words that followed would light a flame of ambition in the hearts of everyone present, beginning a project that would defy the heavens themselves. The silence that followed Nimrod's words was deafening. The crowd, moments before alive with music and laughter, was now still, every face turned toward the man on the podium. Nimrod, feeling the weight of the moment, continued, "I propose that we build not just a city, but the greatest city the world has ever seen. And in the center of it, a tower so high it will touch the clouds." A murmur of astonishment ran through the crowd. Some exchanged incredulous looks, others began to whisper excitedly. Nimrod waited for the agitation to subside before continuing. "Think about it," he said, his voice thick with passion. "A city that will be the center of the world, a beacon of our achievement, and a tower that will be seen from afar, a symbol of our unity and strength. as Nimrod elaborated on his vision, describing wide streets paved with polished stones, abundant markets, magnificent temples, and, of course, the central tower that would rise above it all. The atmosphere in the crowd changed. Initial skepticism gave way to enthusiasm. People began to stand up, nodding in approval. Shouts of "Yes" and "Let's do it" echoed through the night. However, not everyone was convinced. An old man, his white beard shining in the moonlight, slowly stood up. "What about the cost?" he asked, his voice shaky but firm. "How much work, how much time will this require of us?" Nimrod smiled, anticipating the question. "Yes, it will be a challenge," he admitted. "But think of the legacy we will leave. Our names will be remembered for generations." Nimrod's words struck a deep chord. The idea of leaving a lasting mark, of creating something that would outlive them, was irresistible. Even the most ardent skeptics began to surrender to the grandiose vision. The decision was made almost unanimously. They would build the city and the tower. In the days that followed, the plain of Shinar was transformed into a gigantic construction site. Plans were drawn up, materials gathered, and tasks distributed. Linguistic unity proved to be invaluable, enabling seamless coordination between the different working groups. As the first foundations were laid, a sense of common purpose brought the community together like never before. Little did they know that their ambitious project would attract the attention of not only neighboring kingdoms, but a much more powerful and mysterious observer. The sun had barely risen when the sound of thousands of voices and the clanking of tools filled the air of the plain of Shinar. In the center of what was quickly becoming an imposing city stood the skeleton of the tower, already visible from miles away. Nimrod, standing on top of what had already been built, looked toward the horizon with a mixture of pride and insatiable ambition. "Louder!" he shouted to the workers below. "Every brick brings us closer to the heavens." His voice echoed, inspiring a new wave of energy among the builders. For Nimrod and many others, the tower was not just a physical structure, but a challenge to the very limits of humanity. It was a bold statement. Nothing was beyond his reach. As the tower grew, stories and legends began to form around it. Some said that from the top it would be possible to touch the stars. Others whispered that it was an attempt to reach the realm of the gods. For most, however, it was a symbol of their collective unity and ambition. Each new level completed was celebrated with parties that lasted days, reinforcing the sense of shared purpose. However, as the tower approached the clouds, unexpected challenges arose. The wind, almost imperceptible on the ground, became a furious force in the upper levels. Workers struggled to maintain balance, and materials had to be tied down securely. The thin air at the highest levels caused dizziness and breathing difficulties. But for every obstacle, a solution was found. Collective determination seemed to have no limits. The news of the tower that would reach to the heavens spread beyond Shinar. Travelers from distant lands made pilgrimages to see the wonder under construction. Some stayed, offering their skills and workforce to the project. The city around the tower flourished, becoming a center of commerce, culture, and innovation. As the tower rose higher and higher, a sense of unrest began to set in among some. Looking up at what seemed like an endless spire reaching into the sky, some wondered if they had gone too far. Were they really defying the limits imposed by nature, or worse, by divinity? These doubts, however, were quickly drowned out by the enthusiasm of the majority. Their ambition to touch the heavens had become a collective obsession, propelling them to increasingly dizzying heights, unaware that their audacious project was about to face a challenge none of them could have predicted. The sun was setting over the plain of Shinar, casting long shadows over the city under construction and the tower that rose in its center. Nimrod was standing on top of a newly constructed building, watching the tingle of activity below. His eyes shone with a mixture of pride and insatiable ambition. Beside him, Adina, his most trusted advisor, looked at the horizon with a thoughtful expression. "See, Adina?" Nimrod gestured widely, his voice thick with emotion. "All this, built by our own hands. Who could have imagined such grandeur?" Adina nodded slowly, but her eyes betrayed a shadow of worry. "It is truly impressive, my lord. But I must ask, what is the ultimate purpose of all this?" Nimrod turned to face her, his face lit with fierce passion. "Purpose? Our purpose is to make a name for ourselves, to be remembered for all eternity." He paused, looking back at the city. "Think about it, Adina. Generations after generations will look at this tower and talk about us, the builders, the visionaries who dared to defy the heavens themselves." Nimrod's words echoed a feeling that pulsed in the heart of every inhabitant of Shinar. From the humblest worker to the most skilled craftsman, everyone shared the burning desire to leave their mark on the world. It was more than vanity. It was an almost desperate search for meaning and permanence in a world that not long ago had been almost completely destroyed by the flood. In the cities, markets and taverns, conversations often revolved around this topic. "My son," said an old mason to his apprentice, "when we finish this tower, our names will be engraved on its walls. We will be immortal." The young man listened with wide eyes, dreaming of the day when his own name would be known throughout the land. But not everyone shared this unreserved enthusiasm. There were those who silently questioned the wisdom of such ambition. One of these voices was that of Eleazar, a wise man respected in the community. One evening, as a group gathered to hear his words, he spoke in a soft but firm voice. "My friends, it is noble to want to be remembered. But shouldn't we ask ourselves how we will be remembered? What legacy are we really leaving?" His words provoked a thoughtful silence. For a moment, some felt a pang of doubt. But soon, as always happened, collective enthusiasm drowned out these concerns. The promise of greatness, of a name that would echo through the ages, was simply irresistible. As construction progressed, the motivation to make a name for themselves became almost tangible. It was as if each brick laid, each beam erected, was a letter in an immense history book that they were writing. Workers sang as they worked, their voices rising in a chorus of hope and ambition. "May the gods see us," they shouted. "Let the whole world know what we are capable of doing." And so, driven by this burning desire for immortality, the inhabitants of Shinar continued their titanic work. The tower grew larger day by day, stretching toward the sky like an accusing finger, defying the very fabric of the universe. Little did they know that their efforts to make a name for themselves would attract the attention of a being whose name was greater than any they could imagine, and whose actions were about to change the course of their history forever. Dawn brought with it a symphony of sounds on the plain of Shinar. The clanking of tools, the grunt of effort, and the constant thumping of thousands of bricks being shaped and stacked created a unique music of creation and ambition. At the center of this whirlwind of activity was Eba, the master builder, whose expert eyes examined every detail of the work in progress. Eba walked over to a group of workers who were molding bricks. He picked up one of the newly formed bricks, feeling its weight and texture. "Excellent," he muttered, more to himself than to the others. "Steady, but not too heavy. Perfect for our tower." The workers smiled at the implicit praise, proud of their craft. The decision to use bricks instead of stone had been a strategic choice. The plain of Shinar, although fertile, was not rich in stone suitable for building, but what it lacked in stone, it made up for in an abundance of high-quality clay. Eba remembered long discussions with Nimrod about this choice. With bricks, he had argued, we can build higher and faster than we ever dreamed of with stone. The brick-making process was an art in itself. Clay was extracted from riverbanks, mixed with straw for strength, molded into uniform shapes, and then left to dry in Shinar's blazing sun. The result were blocks that were lightweight but incredibly strong when stacked and joined together. But the bricks were only half the equation. Eber moved to another area of the construction site where large cauldrons were bubbling with a dark, viscous substance. The acrid smell of bitumen filled the air. "Be careful with this," he warned a group of young workers. "It's the glue that holds our tower together." Bitumen was a gift from the earth, springing up in natural wells not far from the city. His discovery had been a stroke of luck, or fate, as some preferred to believe. When heated, the bitumen became a powerful adhesive, capable of holding bricks together with a strength that rivaled that of the rock itself. Eber watched with satisfaction as the workers skillfully applied the bitumen between the layers of bricks. "See?" he said, pointing to the base of the tower. "How smooth and even it is. Not even rainwater will find a gap to penetrate." The workers nodded, sharing their pride in the perfection of their work. As the tower grew, the demand for bricks and bitumen increased exponentially. Entire camps had sprung up around the clay extraction sites and bitumen pits. It was hard and often dangerous work, but no one complained. Every brick shaped, every bucket of bitumen prepared, was seen as a personal contribution to the great project that would define their lives. However, as the months passed, some began to notice subtle changes. The nearest clay deposits were running out, forcing them to dig deeper or travel further. The bitumen pits, once abundant, were beginning to show signs of dwindling. Eber, ever the pragmatist, began making mental calculations. How much higher could they go before resources were completely depleted? These concerns, however, were carefully guarded. When Nimrod made his regular inspections, Eber always gave an optimistic report. "We are making rapid progress, my lord," he would say, pointing to the tower that now rose majestically above them. "With these bricks and bitumen, there is no limit to how high we can build." And so, day by day, brick by brick, the tower grew. It was a testament not only to human ambition, but also to the ingenuity in using available materials to accomplish the seemingly impossible. Each added layer was a statement of defiance against the limits imposed by nature and, unbeknownst to them, a provocation to the watchful eyes that watched from a realm far beyond their reach. Above the clouds, beyond the reach of mortal vision, an omniscient gaze watched events unfold on the plain of Shinar. The Creator, in his infinite wisdom, watched with a mixture of curiosity and concern at the spectacle of human ambition unfolding below. The city, a labyrinth of streets and buildings that expanded every day, pulsed with life and purpose. From above, it looked like an intricate web, each strand connecting to others in a complex pattern of human relationships and activities. At the center of this web, the tower rose, an audacious needle that seemed to want to pierce the sky itself. The divine gaze focused on Nimrod, the architect of this grand undertaking. God saw the fire of ambition that burned in the leader's eyes, the passion that inspired thousands to follow his vision. It was an impressive sight, no doubt, but also worrying, because the Creator knew well what could happen when human pride grew unchecked. As the days passed, God watched the workers in their ceaseless toil. I saw the dedication on their sweaty faces. I heard the songs of hope and determination that echoed through the construction sites. It was touching, in a way, to see humanity united in a common purpose. But at the same time, there was something deeply disturbing about this union. The Creator reflected on the flood, that cosmic reset that had been needed not long ago. It had been a painful decision, but necessary in light of the corruption that had taken over creation. And now, here they were again, the descendants of the survivors, already showing signs of that same arrogance that had led to their ancestors' destruction. As the tower grew, approaching the clouds, God could feel the growing excitement among the builders. Each new level completed was a victory, a step closer to what they believed to be divinity. The Creator smiled sadly, knowing how mistaken that notion was. True divinity was not at the top of a tower, however tall, but in the heart of creation itself. God observed with particular interest the interactions between the inhabitants of Shinar. The linguistic unity they shared was a rare and powerful gift. It was fascinating to see how this ability to seamlessly communicate accelerated their progress, allowing them to accomplish feats that would otherwise take generations. But that same unity also amplified their collective ambition, fueling dreams of greatness that could lead to their ruin. As the sun set over another day of frantic construction, the Creator pondered the future. Humanity, its most cherished and complex creation, stood once again on the brink of a precipice. He had been given free will and creativity, precious gifts meant to allow him to flourish and grow. But as so often before, these gifts were being misused, directed not toward spiritual elevation, but toward the glorification of the human ego. Night fell over Shinar, but construction did not stop. In the light of thousands of torches, the tower continued to grow, a luminous affront to the darkness of the night sky. And while the mortals below dreamed of the immortality that their work would bring them, the immortal above contemplated the difficult decision he would have to make. For the Creator knew that sometimes true love required actions that, at first glance, might seem harsh. And so, with a heavy but resolute heart, God began to formulate a plan that would change the course of human history forever. In heavenly heights, far beyond the reach of the tower under construction, the Creator gazed upon the scene below with a mixture of wonder and deep concern. The unity of the builders of Babel was truly impressive. One language, one purpose, one shared ambition that moved mountains, or in this case, raised a tower that defied the heavens themselves. It was a remarkable demonstration of the potential he had planted in humanity. Have you ever felt alone, misunderstood, and hopeless? Imagine waking up every day with a renewed purpose, inner peace, and contagious joy. Our ebook, Paths of Faith, is the key to this transformation. In just 57 days, you will overcome loneliness and build a deep connection with God. Boost your self-esteem and discover your true worth. Find motivation and strength to face any challenge. Experience a peace that surpasses all understanding. Each devotional has been carefully crafted to touch your heart and renew your mind. You can read daily or once a week. Powerful prayers, biblical passages, and deep reflections will guide you on a journey of healing and restoration. Don't wait any longer to live the abundant life that God has planned for you. Click now on the first pinned comment and start your journey of transformation today. Special offer for a limited time. Don't miss this opportunity to be reborn in faith. But this unity, so powerful and inspiring, carried with it the germ of a danger that humanity, in its young existence, could not yet fully understand. God saw beyond the present, his vision encompassing the infinite possibilities of the future. And what he saw worried him deeply. They are one people and speak one language, and they began to build this, murmured the Creator, his voice echoing through the heavenly spheres. If they are not stopped, nothing they plan will be impossible for them. It was not a statement of divine fear or jealousy, as some would later misinterpret. It was a realization charged with parental concern, the recognition that his children were approaching a precipice they could not see. God reflected on the nature of humanity, his most complex and beloved creation. Endowed with free will, humans had the unique ability to choose their own path. This freedom was both a blessing and a burden, offering endless possibilities for growth and fulfillment, but also for error and self-destruction. And now, united in purpose and language, they were speeding in a direction that could lead to their ruin. The Creator pondered the lessons of the past. The Garden of Eden, humanity's first home, had been a paradise of harmony and direct communion with the divine. But the desire to be like gods had led to their fall. Then came the flood, a drastic measure to cleanse the corruption that had spread across the land. And now, here they were again, the descendants of Noah, embarking on a project that echoed that ancient ambition to achieve the divine through purely human means. God's concern was not with the tower itself. After all, what was a structure of bricks and bitumen compared to the vastness of the universe he had created? No, his concern was with what the tower represented. A humanity united not in search of communion with the divine, but in a search for self-glorification. Let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, they had said. That way, we'll make a name for ourselves. The Creator saw the danger of this mentality. A completely united humanity, driven by inordinate ambition and without a true sense of the divine, could achieve impressive feats, it is true. But at what cost? Without the humility that comes from recognizing a greater power, without the diversity of thought that arises from different perspectives, where would this unity lead them? God imagined a future where this unbridled ambition could lead. He saw even greater cities rising, unimaginable technologies being developed, the very fabric of creation being manipulated by human hands. And in the midst of all these advances, he saw the human heart hardening, losing connection with the divine, with nature, and with each other on a deeper level. The irony did not escape the Creator. The tower, supposedly a monument to human greatness, was in fact diminishing humanity, reducing it to a singular myopic quest for height and fame. By trying to reach the heavens, they were actually moving away from the true purpose of their creation, to grow in wisdom, love, and understanding. And so, with a heavy but resolute heart, God came to a conclusion. The unity of humanity, although admirable in many ways, needed to be tempered, not out of punishment or anger, but out of love and concern for the future of his creation. It was time for an intervention, not to destroy, but to redirect, to give humanity a chance to grow not just in height, but in depth and diversity. The Creator knew that his decision would be misunderstood by many. It would be seen as a punishment, an act of a jealous God. But he also knew that, in the grand scheme of things, this intervention would be an act of love, a necessary redirection for the true flourishing of humanity. As night fell over Shinar, and the lights of the city and tower shone like earthly stars, God prepared to act, not with thunder and lightning, not with floods or plagues, but with a subtlety that would change the course of human history forever. It was time to teach humanity a lesson about the beauty of diversity, the importance of humility, and the true meaning of reaching the heavens. Dawn came to the plain of Shinar, but this time it was not like any other. As the first rays of the sun touched the tip of the Tower of Babel, an imperceptible but profound change began to spread among the builders. It was as if an invisible veil had fallen over the city overnight, subtly altering each individual's perception. Eber, the master builder, was the first to notice something strange. As he gave instructions to his team as he did every morning, he noticed confused looks on his workers' faces. "Bring more bricks to the upper level," he ordered, but to his dismay, only a few answered correctly. Others didn't seem to understand, bringing the wrong tools or simply looking at him with perplexed expressions. At first, Eber thought it was just a temporary misunderstanding, perhaps the result of tiredness after days of intense work. But as the morning progressed, it became clear that something deeper was happening. Words that were universally understood yesterday now seemed to have different meanings for different groups of people. Confusion quickly spread throughout the city. In the markets, negotiations that were once simple and straightforward now turned into frustrated gestures and raised voices. Families discovered that their own members were suddenly speaking in incomprehensible ways to each other. Panic began to set in as people realized they could no longer communicate with their neighbors, friends, and even loved ones. Nimrod, alerted to the chaotic situation, rushed to the city center. Climbing onto a raised platform, he attempted to calm the growing crowd. But his words, once inspiring and unifying, now fell on ears that could not understand them. Some in the crowd shouted in response, but their screams were a cacophony of incomprehensible sounds. The leader watched in horror as his grand project, his vision of unity and power, began to crumble before his eyes. The tower, which should have been a monument to his glory, now seemed to mock him, a mute symbol of frustrated ambition. As chaos unfolded in the city, in the heavenly heights, the Creator watched. There was no joy in his act, only the solemn certainty that it was necessary. "Behold, they are one people, and they all speak one language," he had said. "And this is just the beginning of what they will do." The decision to confuse languages was not taken lightly, but with the wisdom of someone who sees beyond the present moment to the infinite ramifications of the future. As the day progressed, groups began to naturally form among those who could still understand each other. Families were divided, long-standing friendships were broken, and the great unified community of Babel began to fragment into distinct linguistic tribes. Some, desperate to maintain unity, tried to create new systems of communication. Elaborate gestures, symbols drawn in the sand, everything was tried in the hope of recreating the universal understanding they had lost. But it was in vain. The change was too profound, reaching the very roots of cognition and expression. As night fell, the reality of the situation began to set in. The great work that had united everyone was now at a standstill. Without a common language, the complex coordination required to continue construction of the tower was impossible. Groups began to separate, some deciding to leave in search of new lands where they could start over among those who spoke their new language. Nimrod, the once mighty leader, watched helplessly as his dream of a unified empire fell apart. The tower, unfinished, stood as a silent reminder of human pride and its consequences. But not all was lost. As the different groups separated, they took with them not only new languages, but new perspectives, new ways of seeing and interpreting the world. What seemed like a curse actually carried with it the seeds of a blessing, the richness of cultural diversity that would come to define the human experience. And so, under a starry sky that seemed more vast and mysterious than ever, humanity took its first steps into a new chapter in its history. A chapter marked not by unity of purpose, but by diversity of expression. A chapter in which the challenge would no longer be to build a tower to reach the heavens, but to build bridges of understanding between the different cultures and languages that now colored the mosaic of human experience. The Creator, observing all of this, knew that the path ahead would be challenging, but also rich in possibilities. The true greatness of humanity, he knew, would not come from a single towering tower, but from the intricate and beautiful tapestry that his children would now weave together, each contributing their own unique color and pattern to the grand design of human history. The sun had barely risen when Adina, wife of master bricklayer Zered, woke up with a start. Something was wrong. The usual hustle and bustle of the city, the steady rhythm of the hammers and the shouting of the supervisors were absent. In its place, a chaos of dissonant voices filled the air. She shook her husband, who mumbled incomprehensible words. "Zered, wake up. Something's happening." But when he opened his eyes and spoke, Adina stepped back, shocked. The words that came out of his mouth were strange, alien. It was her husband's voice, but the language she didn't recognize. Panic gripped Adina as she ran out of her small brick house. The streets of Babel, normally organized and purposeful, even in the early hours of the morning, were in complete chaos. Neighbors shouted at each other, gesturing wildly, their faces contorted in confusion and fear. In the central square, where the elders usually gathered to discuss the day's plans, a crowd was forming. In the center, Nimrod, the powerful leader who had designed the great tower, tried to calm the mob. But his words, once charismatic and inspiring, now sounded like unintelligible grunts to half the crowd. Adina saw families being torn apart by the invisible language barrier. Children cried, unable to understand the comforts offered by their own mothers. Longtime friends regarded each other suspiciously, as if they had suddenly become strangers. At the base of the great tower, the chaos was even more pronounced. Workers abandoned their tools, unable to understand their supervisors' instructions. Some tried desperately to continue their work, but without the necessary coordination, their efforts were futile and even dangerous. As the day progressed, the reality of the situation began to set in. The dream of Babel, the city that would touch the heavens, was crumbling not because of structural flaws or lack of resources, but because of the most basic of human needs, communication. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the unfinished tower, groups began to form. People naturally gravitated to those with whom they could still communicate. The once unified social fabric of Babel was unraveling, giving way to distinct linguistic tribes. In the weeks following the Great Confusion, the once vibrant city of Babel became a shadow of its former self. The tower, which should have been the greatest monument ever built by man, remained unfinished, its irregular silhouette silhouetted against the sky as a constant reminder of the interrupted dream. Nimrod, the visionary leader whose ambition had driven the project, spent hours every day atop the unfinished structure, looking down on the fragmented city below. His interpreter, Akkad, one of the few who could still understand several of the new languages, remained at his side. "Tell me, Akkad," Nimrod murmured, his voice thick with bitterness. "How long until we can resume construction?" Akkad hesitated, knowing the answer would not please his master. "My lord, the master builders, they say it is impossible. Without a common language, the necessary coordination is—" Nimrod interrupted him with a brusque gesture. He knew the truth, even if he refused to accept it. The tower, his legacy, would remain unfinished. The dream of touching the heavens had died with the old words that everyone shared. In the abandoned construction sites around the tower, small groups of workers still gathered, more out of habit than purpose. Zered, the master mason, watched sadly as his former companions tried in vain to coordinate even the simplest tasks. A young apprentice, Lilith, approached Zered, her eyes shining with determination. Through gestures and drawings in the sand, she tried to communicate an idea, a new system of signs and symbols that could help them understand each other again. For a moment, Zered's heart was filled with hope. But as more workers joined them, the complexity of the task became evident. Each group interpreted the symbols differently, based on their new language and perspective. What was supposed to unite only created more confusion. In the city's markets, once vibrant commerce had been reduced to basic exchanges and rudimentary gestures. The sophisticated economy that had allowed the tower to be built was crumbling, as was the structure itself. At night, around bonfires spread throughout the city, the inhabitants of Babel told stories. Stories about the time before the confusion, when everyone understood each other, when the dream of reaching the heavens seemed within reach. These stories, although not understood by everyone, became a link, a shared memory of a past that quickly became legend. Meanwhile, in the darkest corners of the city, rumors began to circulate. Some spoke of divine punishment, others of an ancient curse finally fulfilled. Regardless of the explanation, one thing was clear. The age of Babel as they knew it had come to an end. Dawn brought with it an inevitable decision. The streets of Babel, once filled with purpose and unity, now witnessed the beginning of an exodus. Entire families, carrying what little they could, left the shadow of the unfinished tower, heading in different directions, guided by the only thing they still shared: language. Adina and Zered, hand in hand, watched the departing procession from the door of their house. "Where are we going?" asked Adina, her voice shaking. Zered shook his hand, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "To the east," he replied, where the mountains touch the sky. There, perhaps, we can begin again. Not far away, Lilith, the young apprentice, joined a group of artisans who planned to follow the course of the great river. Her dreams of becoming a great construction company had been shattered, but in her heart, a new ambition was born: to find a new land where she could use her skills to build not a tower, but a community. In the center of the city, Nimrod made one last effort to keep his people together. His speech, once capable of inspiring crowds, was now a cacophony of sounds, incomprehensible to most. Some still followed him, attracted by the charisma that transcended language barriers, but they were few compared to the masses who left. As the days passed, the city that had once been the center of the known world emptied. Caravans formed, united not by blood ties or ancient friendship, but by the new linguistic reality they shared. Each group carried with them seeds of their common culture, but also the potential for something new and unique. On the roads that stretched in all directions from Babel, travelers faced unimaginable challenges. Unknown lands, hostile climates, and the constant fear of the unknown awaited them. But there was also hope. Hope for a new beginning, for a place where they could be understood, where they could rebuild what they had lost. Years passed. The caravans that had set out from Babel turned into settlements, towns, and eventually new cities, each with its own language, its own traditions, but all carrying at its core the distant memory of a tower that almost touched the sky. And so what began as a punishment, a division, became the catalyst for the rich tapestry of cultures and civilizations that spread across the face of the earth. Babel's ambition had been thwarted, but in its place something grander and more diverse had been born. In the generations that followed the Great Dispersion, the story of the tower and the city that almost touched the heavens became legend. In nomadic camps, newly established villages, and emerging cities, elders told the story to fascinated young listeners, each version colored by the narrator's unique language and culture. On one of these nights of stories, under a starry sky on the plain of Shinar, not far from the ruins of the ancient city, old Etana gathered his clan around the fire. His eyes, dull with age but bright with the wisdom of many years, swept over the anxious faces around him. "Have you ever wondered," he began, his voice hoarse but strong, "why we called that place Babel?" A murmur of curiosity ran through the group. Even after so many years, the name still evoked a mixture of awe and awe. Etana continued, "Our ancestors, in their ancient language, called it Bab Ilu, the gate of God. They believed they were building a passage to the divine realm." He paused, letting the words sink in. But when languages mixed and no one could understand each other anymore, the city became a symbol of something else. A young woman, Inanna, leaned forward, her eyes shining in the firelight. "From what, grandfather?" she asked, giving voice to everyone's curiosity. Etana smiled, a smile that carried both wisdom and sadness. "Confusion, my dear. Babel has become synonymous with confusion. In the language of our ancestors, Balal means to confuse, to mix, and that is what happened there, a great mixture of languages and peoples." An old warrior, scars from ancient battles marking his face, then spoke. "But why did the Creator do this? Why confuse us?" Etana looked at the sky, as if searching for the answer in the stars. "Some say it was punishment for our arrogance. Others believe it was an act of mercy, preventing us from making even greater mistakes." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "But maybe it was a little of both." The flames danced, casting long shadows as Etana continued her story. He spoke of Nimrod's inordinate ambition, of the tower that grew day by day, and of the moment when everything changed. "Imagine," he said, his voice now barely a whisper, forcing everyone to lean in closer, "waking up one day and not understanding your own children, your neighbors, your closest friends." The confusion that followed was total. And so, what was supposed to be God's gate became a monument to human confusion. Inanna, still fascinated, asked, "But grandfather, if it was so terrible, why do we still tell this story? Why don't we forget it?" Etana smiled, a gleam of wisdom in her eyes. "Ah, my dear, it is precisely because it was terrible that we must remember. Babel teaches us about the dangers of arrogance, about the limits of human power. But it also teaches us about adaptation, about starting over." He looked around at the watchful faces of his clan. "See for yourselves. Our ancestors left Babel confused and frightened, but look at what we've built since then. New languages, new cultures, new ways of seeing the world. The confusion of Babel scattered us, but it also made us who we are." Etana's words echoed in the night, carried by the wind beyond the circle of firelight. And so, the story of Babel, the city of confusion, continued to be told, a constant reminder of the past and a guide to the future. Theological and cultural implications of the story of Babel. The rising sun cast long shadows over the desert dunes as a caravan of merchants prepared for another day's journey. Among them, two men stood out, Ishme-Dagon, a Babylonian sage, and Abram, a Hebrew shepherd. Despite their different backgrounds, the two had developed an unlikely friendship during the long journey. As they set up their tents, Ishme-Dagon noticed Abram looking thoughtfully at the horizon. "What disturbs your thoughts so early, my friend?" asked the Babylonian. Abram turned to his companion, a wistful smile on his sun-lined face. "I was thinking about Babel, Ishme, the tower, the tongues, everything that happened." Ishme-Dagon nodded understandingly. The story of Babel was known to both, although each saw it through a different lens. "Ah, yes, the great tower that almost touched the heavens, a monument to human ambition and its downfall." The two men sat in the shade of a large rock, sharing a skin of water as the caravan finished its preparations. Abram spoke first, his voice thick with reverence. "For my people, Babel is a reminder of Yahweh's power and will. He saw the arrogance of men and acted to remind them of their place in the world." Ishme-Dagon considered the words for a moment before responding. "Interesting. For us Babylonians, the story has different nuances. We see Babel as a symbol of the greatness we could achieve, and the price of hubris." Abram continued, "But don't you see, my friend? The scattering of tongues, although initially seen as a punishment, can also be interpreted as a divine gift. It forced us to spread out, to populate the entire earth as per the Creator's original command." Ishme-Dagon pondered this, her eyes fixed on the rolling dunes. "An interesting perspective, Abram. In our traditions, we see the multiplicity of languages as a challenge, something to be overcome. This is why we value scribes and interpreters so much." A young member of the caravan approached, clearly intrigued by the conversation. "Forgive me, wise men, but how can the inability to understand each other be a gift?" he asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Abram smiled gently at the young man. "Think, my son, each language carries with it a unique way of seeing the world. Words that exist in one language may have no equivalent in another, forcing us to expand our minds to understand new concepts." Ishme-Dagon nodded, adding, "And not just that. Linguistic diversity forces us to seek understanding, to strive to communicate. It fosters empathy, patience." The young man seemed to ponder these words deeply. Abram continued, "Furthermore, the story of Babel teaches us about the limits of human power. No matter how high we build our towers, there is always something greater than us." "But," Ishme-Dagon interrupted, "it also shows us what we can achieve when we work together." The tower, although unfinished, was a marvel of engineering and cooperation. The conversation attracted more members of the caravan, forming a small circle around the two wise men. An elderly woman, her eyes shining with accumulated wisdom, spoke. In my village, we are told that after the dispersal, each group took with them a part of the original knowledge. They say that only when all languages are brought together again will all knowledge be restored. This statement provoked murmurs of approval and contemplation among the listeners. Abram smiled, recognizing the depth of the observation. A beautiful way of looking at things, my lady. It suggests that every culture, every people, has something unique and valuable to offer the world. Ishme-Dagon added, and perhaps that is the ultimate lesson of Babel. Not that we should all speak the same language, but that we should learn to appreciate and understand each other's languages. The sun was now high in the sky, signaling that it was time for the caravan to resume its journey. As the group dispersed to prepare the camels and organize the goods, the young man who had asked the first question approached Abram and Ishme-Dagon again. "Wise people," he said, his voice full of determination, "your words have inspired me. I have decided that when I reach the next city, I will seek to learn its language and customs, no matter how different they are from mine." Abram placed a hand on the young man's shoulder, his face lit up with a warm smile. "This, my son, is the true wisdom born of Babel. Not building towers to reach the heavens, but bridges to reach each other." As the caravan resumed its journey, the talk of Babel continued, echoing among the dunes. Ancient history took on new meanings, shaped by the diverse experiences and perspectives of travelers. And so, Babel's legacy lived on not just in the memory of the unfinished tower, but in the connections forged between people of different backgrounds, united in their search for mutual understanding. As they advanced through the desert, Abram and Ishme-Dagon silently reflected on how such an ancient story could still have such a profound impact. The lesson of Babel, they realized, was not just about the past, but a guide to the future. A future where diversity would not be a curse, but a blessing. A kaleidoscope of cultures and ideas, enriching the tapestry of human experience.